Good morning. As I say, thank you for joining us. The high attendance here is a reflection, I'm sure, of the importance of what was always going to be a big budget, politically and economically. A small intro from me, followed by Alan Simpson, our Deputy CEO, who will cover off the economic and political impacts and such of yesterday's budget. And we're also joined here by David Sheen, colleague who is here to help out with what I imagine will be the thornier, more technical areas of the questions that you will put to us. Talking of which, please do use the questions function. If you have any specific questions about business specific, as into your business, please do include them. I suspect that we're going to have a lot of questions today, so we might not get round to answering all of them today, as we do have a lot of people in, but we will endeavour to answer what we can today on a basis of the relevance to a widest audience. And then inevitably we'll have to take some of the questions to the groups and forums we have with members in the weeks ahead. So, as I say, the budget was always going to be a bit of a landmark one for a few reasons. Firstly, of course, the first one delivered by a woman, but of course the first one delivered by a Labour government in over 14 years, and see how the ideology might change the content, and met with keen scrutiny as Labour tries to deliver and stake its claim on fiscal leadership. I think it's fair to say that overnight the global economic organisations and markets have actually reacted fairly positively, but I think, having spoken and had feedback from members, for a budget with the theme of invest, invest, invest at the top of it, it's left many in hospitality stating that they'll now have a fairly scant chance of being able to invest in their businesses and people. So if we go to the first slide, just to say what we're going to talk about. As I say, Alan will talk about the political and economic context, what was in the budget, what it means for hospitality businesses in terms of costs and other resource impacts. And then we'll have a quick look at what we have been doing prior to, up to the budget, and what we will be doing in the coming days, weeks and months. I think then all it remains for me to do is remind you once again, use the question function, and we'll come back to those after Alan has taken us through the following slides. Alan.
Thank you, Tony. So we'll start with the political and economic context of what was, as you say, a highly controversial budget. I want to be clear, we are not taking a view, but I wanted to start our conversation today with what Rachel Reeves thought she was doing when she stood up to deliver a budget with perhaps no political upsides to her. So if we can move on 2 slides. She argues, of course, that she's been left significant bills by the last government. The Office of Budgetary Responsibility and the independent IFS have agreed with her, but it is far from uncontested, and the last Chancellor would strongly disagree. Where there is no disagreement is that the UK economy and the government's finances are in a very challenging position. And I want to show you 6 very quick, scary, and Halloween-themed, perhaps therefore, charts which demonstrate the challenge facing Rachel Reeves yesterday. So if you can go on to the next chart. All charts about the UK economy look like this. This one is GDP per capita, which is the economic output per person in the UK, and it never recovered from the financial crisis. We would all be generating nearly £11,000 more a year if it had continued on its 50-year trend line. But as you can see, it very much hasn't, which is why on the next slide, real wages haven't grown in that period either. Real wages are 4% higher in the private sector, but a nurse earns 9% less in real terms than they did when Lehman Brothers fell, a teacher 10% less. And if we move on to the next slide, that very largely accounts for a very challenging position for the UK government. Income tax and NICs between them are 46% of the UK government's income, which has led to a historic gap between spending and revenues, worsened by the direct costs of the financial crisis itself, the pandemic, and of course, an ageing society. And that's why, as we move on to the next slide, we can see that very simply services have been decimated. Only two departments have seen their income grow in real terms. That's the Home Office and social care. Everything else has declined significantly. And at the same time, on the next slide, capital investment in the public and the private sector has fallen significantly, which is why on our final of our 6 Halloween charts, productivity in the UK is so poor, and therefore our ability to grow revenues to invest is so poor. That is her challenge. It is a real one. And it's why yesterday we were very clear to say that we sympathise entirely with the position that the Chancellor is in, but our view is she shouldn't balance the books on the back of Britain's high streets. So if we can move on now to what's in the budget, and of course why so many of you have dialed in today, I want to pull out the elements which are most relevant to us as a sector. There are many wider readers that you can find in today's media, but we wanted to focus on what's most relevant to us. And if we can start with business rates, there's two parts to this. The first one is that the hospitality rates relief for businesses with a rateable value of under £110,000 who are facing a significant cliff edge, we'll see that cliff edge softened. So if you take an £80,000 rateable value city centre restaurant, they were going to see business rates rise from the 1st of April next year from £11,000 to £44,000. They will now rise from £11,000 to £26,400. That is a year-on-year increase, but it's a reduction in that increase of £17,600, reflecting very significant pressure from UK Hospitality and our partners in our sister organisations as well. And at the same time, we saw an announcement of a new permanent hospitality and retail discount for premises, not businesses, but premises, under £500,000. That is 99.6% of the sector. The amount of that discount, which will kick in from the end of the tax year coming, is unknown, but we will be pushing hard to maintain the current levels of discount. So business rates are very much a curate's egg. Yes, it is good news in the sense that the last government had budgeted to take reliefs away entirely from the start of the new financial year. But we cannot shy away from the fact that it means a year-on-year increase of £500 million. Moving on to the next slide, and employer NICs. This is, of course, for many of us, the big announcement yesterday. There was a headline increase of 1.2 percentage points, which is less than the 2% feared. But at the same time, the threshold at which an employer will pay NICs will fall from just over £9,000 to £5,000. And that threshold change is half, roughly, of the £1 billion increase costs which we believe the sector will have to pay. It means, for example, that a worker who was working Saturday and Sunday and would have sat inside that threshold will no longer be exempt on the Sunday, and only a Saturday worker would be. There's some good news with employee allowances increasing, which obviously will benefit small businesses. And we can't see the employer NICs rises without a context of the minimum wage on the next slide, which of course rose earlier in the week to a level of £12.21 for over 21s, higher than the £12.10 guidance midpoint. That's a 6.7% increase. For somebody who is 18 to 20, it rises to £10, which is a 16.3% increase. For an under 18 or an apprentice, it rises to £7.55, an 18% increase. And the accommodation offset rate, which was raised as a question in our last webinar, rises to 10.66, which is a 6.7% increase. Together, that brings you to an impact on the sector of perhaps 1.9 billion. But of course, it has to be seen in the context of NICs. So that 6.7% increase for an over 21 may be more like 10%. And for some parts of the employment base, the increase may be rather larger than that. So on the next slide, very simply, the last week has cost us 3.4 billion, half a billion plus a billion plus 1.9 billion. And then on the next slide, we'll see the Employment Rights Bill, which we did a webinar about last week, which I would encourage people to go and watch. We'll see direct costs to the sector of perhaps another £500 million, according to the government's own estimates. So we are approaching 4 billion. And then finally, on the next slide, I just wanted to share some macroeconomic impact because it will affect the demand that your businesses enjoy. The budget will slow interest rate falls. Most analysts expected interest rates to fall by about 1.25% by the start of by this time next year. It's now likely to fall by more like 1%. That will have a direct impact on costs of borrowing, but it also has a direct impact on consumer confidence in the obvious ways. Inflation will be slightly worse. That's driven by the increases in borrowing, which were announced yesterday, and the simple arithmetic effect of the price inputs going up from the measures which we've just discussed. And then finally, growth will be negatively affected. Cannot measure the positive impact of the non-fiscal measures announced yesterday, for example, changes to planning rules, which will help some of the businesses on this call. Those effects will be measurable on growth, but it's hard to do in advance as a model. But the simple fact is, this budget week, which saw announcements on wages and on NICs and on business rates in particular, will cost us £3.5 billion more or less. And even though we were one of very few sectors mentioned and supported by name by Rachel Reeves, it is very hard to look at the changes which have come this week and not recognise the challenges that will face your business. Shortly, we will move to Q&A and we can talk in detail about any of these measures or indeed any other measures in the budget. As Tony says, we have David with us to support us on any technical questions. But before we move into that, I'd like to hand over to Tony to talk about what we've been doing on your behalf and, of course, what we will continue to do over the next year.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, if we could have the next slide, please. So, as Alan says, we've certainly been busy, and I think the team has been highly visible in the run-up to the budget, and indeed, sometimes not necessarily visible, but scurrying away with lots of engagement on this. We've had incredible number of meetings with government ministers, including when the current government ministers were in opposition. This hasn't just been a rush in the weeks prior to the budget, but a really long slog. That said, we have been busy also with a programme of meetings with new MPs, and I'm glad to say that many of those have joined the Hospitality and Tourism APPG, who collectively wrote to the Chancellor, making our case on, in particular, business rates. And as dark as the scene might see as a whole, I think we have to appreciate the fact that actually we did get a fair amount of what we asked for on business rates, albeit being outweighed perhaps by other things. And we also collaborated with other organisations such as the British Retail Consortium, again to make representation to the Chancellor. We had our own letter to the Chancellor, and of course the one with other trade associations, BII, BBPA, etc., to the Chancellor as well. So we really had a good spread of representation on all the issues across our policy agenda. And I, for particular thanks I want to say to our members who signed up. I think it was about 170 of them signing up on our what we call the CEO letter to the Chancellor, which really was incredibly useful because it makes a massive difference to have the brands and the names from the industry making the case for us to the Chancellor and to other ministers. So thank you so much for that. And also, while we're at it, thanks to all of the people who respond to our surveys and joint industry surveys. Really valuable and much appreciated. It helps to inform and lend credibility to our actions and our outputs. And not just nationally, but regionally too. We use the regionalised and devolved administration business rates impact to the relevant media last week or the week before, it's all a blur, to make this a story exactly where it's having an effect on the high streets. So thankfully, that translated well into high profile and widespread coverage. We had high impact media appearance from the UKH team, including Sky, BBC News, Radio 4, ITN. Many of you would have seen Kate Nicholls, our CEO, on Newsnight last night and on College Green on all sorts of channels. And we had, again, thankfully, some really good representation, as is on this slide here, from some leaders in the industry, including some excellent media appearances from Simon Emily from Fuller's on Radio 5, Fiona Eastwood from Merlin on Wake Up to Money, Andrew Selly from Bid Food on the Today programme, I'm pretty sure, yeah. And David McDowell from Stonegate, ditto, actually. And over September, I said it wasn't a mad rush just in the weeks before the budget, but in media terms, of course, that's where you make the most impact. And we had, in September, coming on close to 600 pieces of coverage, and in October, almost 1,500. So, yeah, over 2,000 in all. So, you know, hopefully, I don't think we could have turned any more stones. Let's say there's no stones unturned. So what will we be doing from here, though? If we could have the next slide, thank you. Well, quite frankly, it's what I hope you would expect from us, which is to continue to press hard to shape the policy environment. And we have three really quite important pillars that we'll be pushing out, not exclusively those three, but three probably worth mentioning here. The industrial policy green paper, working to make sure that the government's industrial strategy includes hospitality. It's, you know, there's a consultation ongoing at the moment with the government, looking at the key areas for our sector, of course, which would be things like place, skills, recruitment, infrastructure, and planning, as the government looks to build its strategy, which, in its own word, looks to deliver the certainty and stability businesses need to invest in the high growth sectors that will drive our growth mission. And we all know that hospitality certainly has the potential to be, and has been in the past, a high growth sector. So I think we can use that platform. Another is the Employment's Right Bills consultations. We're looking to engage on key parts of that, which has so many relevant elements for hospitality: zero hours contracts, fire and rehire, trade union legislation, and statutory sick pay, just to mention a few. I don't want to go into too much detail here, partly because of time, but please do be aware of the webinar that we did on the raft of employment rights issues, which is really comprehensive, has had really good feedback. It's available for members on the UKH website, so please do use that resource if you can. But really, the other one, which is the starting gates just opened on yesterday, really is making sure that the plans for the new business rates multiplier work properly. We're looking at business rates reform. As I say, sort of positive news yesterday on that front. The government published details of the consultation as part of a huge package of budget documents yesterday, and it looks like we'll have a really good opportunity to nail down the details of the wins that we had in that regard, in terms of how future business rate system will work in a way that no longer penalises bricks and mortar businesses such as yours. The document sets out a pretty robust schedule of consultation between now and the end of March, so expect to hear a lot from us on that along the way. So that probably takes us on to, unless Alan, there's anything on those three that you wanted to mention, I think we can probably go to questions. Okay. So we have one here. Good morning and thank you. Is there an increase to London living wage?
I'll take this one. The London Living Wage isn't set by government, but it's set by the Living Wage Foundation. I think they made an announcement about a month ago, and the London Living Wage will be £13.85 from next year, an increase of 70p, and the non-London Living Wage will be £12.60, up 60 pence.
Okay, thank you very much. We also have the government subtly slipped a policy point around guest beers into the Red Book. The Red Book, for anybody that doesn't know, is the sort of detail where the devils are. It's a huge amount of detail to explain and accompany the announcement that the dispatch box. And it reads, guest beers consultation. The government will consult on ways to ensure that small brewers can retain and expand their access to UK pubs and maximise drinkers' choice, including through provisions to enable more guest beers. The question thereafter is, have you had any dialogue with Treasury or DBT around the Transforming Business Rates paper? And what format the consultation initial phase of engagement will take? What is the UKH's view on what the new lower permanent and universal hospitality business rates multiplier should be? Oh, there's a few things here. Sorry, I thought this was one question. And what is UKH's view on what should be the priority from a lobbying perspective now? So, let's break these up.
If I'll take the guest beers one first.
Yeah,
we had a conversation with Department for Business and Trade at the end of last week on this. The feeling I got was that they came up with the policy and didn't have any clue as to how to implement it. So I think this is a genuine consultation that they'll be looking for feedback on. We think it's we think it's tinkering around the edges, frankly, and it's probably not a priority. From our perspective, I think businesses will be stocking beers that they think are going to sell, and I think it's not really for government necessarily to be too heavily involved in that sort of space. But yeah, I think we'll wait for the consultation before sort of moving on to any detail on that.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think that on the have you had any dialogue with HMT and DBT, Treasury and DBT around the business rates paper, the answer is quite clearly yes, we have. What format the consultation initial phase of engagement will take is laid out in that document that I referred to earlier, and the very initial phase is by November 15th. We have to, which I think we'll probably just do in an email today, if we haven't already done it, is to email stating that we want to be part of that consultation. I think it's fairly clear that we will be anyway, because it's of such incredible significance to hospitality. And then from what it lays out in that document, and which I've only had time to scan, I must admit, it looks as though there will be a schedule of different consultation exercises, both in person, virtual, and probably digitally, quite a lot, on the very many elements. But you know, that will become clearer as time passes, unless any colleagues know anything more than that.
Yeah, so the business rates team got in touch with us and set up a call for two o'clock yesterday. So about 10 minutes after the Chancellor sat down, we were talking to the business rates team. So they're very keen that we are involved. They see this quite rightly as something we're very interested in. It was a policy that we put forward to Labour in opposition about 18 months ago. So it has delivered on our policy ask. In terms of what it will look like, there will be two new tax rates for hospitality at a lower rate than the current standard and small business multiplier. So that's a hugely positive step for us. That is recognition of the benefits of hospitality and that we are overtaxed. In terms of how it's going to be paid for, there will be a higher levy on businesses with a rateable value over 500,000, over 500,000 rateable value. I think there's some really big positives out of this. Obviously, we want to see what the reduction in rate is. That needs to be material, and that's going to be our absolute priority. I think from a member business perspective, where the reliefs were capped, we're not going to see that with the new system. There won't be that 110,000 cap, which has meant that reliefs for quite a lot of businesses are essentially immaterial. So the way we designed the policy proposal was to specifically get around that, and I think we've done that with this. So yeah, as Tony said, there's a sort of deadline to register interest. Clearly, we are already interested, but we have registered as of last night, and then there'll be a fairly intensive dialogue sort of through to March, we believe, and then there'll be sort of formal consultation processes. But I think this is going to be number one priority for us, jointly alongside Employment Rights Bill.
Well, sorry, Alan, were you gonna?
No, I was saying, yeah.
You mentioned the Employment Rights Bill, so I'm going to just jump in with this one. One attendee says, whilst I understand that the Employment Rights Bill is largely in consultation, is there anything that we can expect to come into force early 2025 or even the new tax year? I mean, we obviously have tipping introduced already, but is there anything else, David, that we should expect in that time frame?
Not from a legislative perspective. The whole Make Work Pay package does include national living wage. That's obviously the substantive one that will change as of April 2025, but nothing legislative.
Thank you. And one here about inheritance tax, saying it penalises bricks and mortar businesses and hospitality. I suppose this is probably something along that probably most affects things like family hotels, family-owned hotels, etc. Will put an end to family businesses passing into the next generation. What can we hope for? That's an open-ended question, but I'm not sure that we quite yet know. But do any colleagues have a view?
Yeah, so it looks like, sorry, Alan, if you want to jump in, please do. But it looks like the change, there'll be 100% relief on the first £1 million and then 50% relief beyond that. There's a commitment to consult on the details, but at the moment that's about all we've got. So we're very aware that this is an issue that's of relevance to member companies. So we are going to keep this on the radar and make sure we're involved in those conversations.
Okay, thank you. Quite a straightforward one here in terms of the question. Are the pensions contributions for employers changing? The current is 3%.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a question for clarity here. The national insurance now being applicable for over 5,000, not 9,100. The cost per employee is £600 per person. Is this calculation correct?
I think it depends on. Can I come back to that one?
Yeah, I think we can come back to you on that, Phil. Okay, so while I'm just looking through this. A rise in the soft drinks levy was announced. Do we know when this is applicable from and how much the initial rise is?
We understand that is going to be from April 2025. That I don't believe they've published the level of increase, but I think the first one's going to be quite a big hit because it hasn't increased since it was introduced, and they said that they will be increasing it to sort of take account of the inflationary impact since then. So let's try and get you a formal figure. We'll do a follow-up after this with some answers that we haven't got, but it's likely to be quite a big hit first up, and then it will increase with inflation after that.
Thank you. Here's one that I think allows us to make a bit of a promo for UK Hospitality. It says, with regards to employment rights consultations, how can small businesses get involved to ensure our voices are heard? And I guess I've kind of answered that in as much as engage with us, but so you might have other answers.
Yeah, so we've got. Sorry.
Sorry,
Uh,
I was just going to come in and say that I didn't I can see it's Rachel who's asked that question. Rachel, there's two things really with the employment rights and the parallel industrial strategy consultations. One of the things that what we will be doing over the course of the next 2 years really to 2026 is running consultation exercises with our members and the wider sector. So we will have mechanisms where we will reach out to people and invite people to comment, either sharing specific observations about policies that they recommend or just help us find examples and practical case studies of what impacts of different choices would be. So Rachel, you will see us talk quite publicly and give opportunities for businesses, including yours, to feed in.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. I see we've actually got a few questions on national insurance contributions, and as I think we've already seen, it is quite a tricky one to answer right now. It's quite technical, so I'm going to make a suggestion that we make something available online, in due course, because it's a thorny one. Just looking at, and I know we've discussed this internally, I'm not sure whether we know the answer to this yet, but of course we will have one in time. Do you foresee any rates relief or savings for hospitality businesses with a rateable value of over £500,000? And we know that in the context of London, there's a few, especially hotels, to which that would apply.
No, I think is the simple answer to that.
Yeah.
I think the policy intention of the government is a relative rebalancing. The small percentage of hotels who will be, as the question identifies, in city centre locations, they will, because of the way that it's calculated, be many of them very iconic hotels, will not benefit from this. And I think it's very unlikely in the future that the government would adjust their thinking on that. I think we have to say very explicitly that we absolutely recognise that that's suboptimal if you are a large rateable value city centre hotel. What we would say is that the percentage of the sector which is brought into scope of reliefs is higher than might have been expected going into yesterday, but it is by far from universal.
Changing tax slightly. Do you know when capital gains change will come into effect? I mean, my assumption is beginning of the tax year, but I don't know if I don't have major confidence in whether I'm correct or not.
I believe it's actually instantaneous.
Okay.
The main rate changes will come into effect for disposals made on or after 30th of October 2024, as in yesterday.
And similarly, in case it's relevant to anybody, changes to second home stamp duty were immediate.
Yeah. Okay, and thank you, Brian, for putting something on here which says, regarding the question earlier about national insurance contributions and the threshold, Martin Lewis, who I don't think any of us would challenge on something like this, said last night the cost of difference between 5k and 9.1k is over £600 per person. So I think I'm not going to claim that for ourselves, but that's what Martin Lewis says, just to throw that in there.
I think fundamentally it depends on how many hours you're working. I think at 38 hours, we're seeing an increase of over £1,000 in the NICS bill. But we'll make all those calculations available online, and we can put together a little ready reckoner that people can use for their own benefit if that's helpful.
Right. Okay. Sorry, just checking some more. We've got quite a lot in here about national insurance contributions. Okay. Yeah, more about Nix. Because there's so many of these are about national insurance contributions, we're largely getting through them. The changes to BPR will be of serious concern to many of UK Hospitality's independent members. Will UKH, what will we be doing about this, essentially, is the answer, is the question.
Yeah, so this is another one that we need to see a bit more detail, but this is relates to that inheritance tax point, and the sort of passing on of businesses from generation to generation, typically within a family. We will definitely be responding to that. There's as always with the budget, there'll be a raft of consultations that will have a lot more detail, and we'll be responding to all of those which are relevant. And of course, this clearly is for a lot of our members. So we'll be following up and of course liaising with members on our approach.
Okay, thanks, David. We have on here, I've read sources online that advise that even though there is no increase on employee taxing, the increase of NINO, N-I-N-O, contributions for business can be passed on. Is this the case?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. Clearly, any increase in the employer taxes can be passed on in pricing. It can't necessarily. It's likely to result in people paying lower wage increases than they might have done otherwise, but obviously not without going below the national minimum wage rates. But yeah, I think typically it will see an increase in prices and probably slow down wage increases.
Just in regard to one long question, just want to reassure members that although we do focus perhaps publicly in our output on certain issues, we are of course making representations to government on the entire raft of challenges facing the hospitality sector. We have on here, do we expect this is a wide open one. Do we expect consumer confidence to increase following yesterday's budget? What do we think will happen to consumer confidence?
Shall I take this one?
Yeah.
So consumer confidence is complex, nebulous, and in some ways irrational. The two elements of yesterday, which I think are likely to have at least short-term negative impacts on consumer confidence, are the macroeconomic impact I described, where interest rates will slow down. There's still about 20% of the UK's mortgage holders who are renewing their mortgages for the first time since the spike in interest rates between now and June. And the slowdown in interest rates interest rate falls will have a negative impact on both their perception of the future and just the amount of money they have to spend. Very clearly, inflation being worse will mean that the sum which we often share with this group, which is how much a pub or a restaurant or a cafe needs to be selling in order to have broken even against 2019, will go up, and growth will go down. I think it is worth saying that it should be quite dispersed across who your customers are. So if you take your customers from lower earners, the fact that wages amongst those groups are going up should be beneficial to your customers' ability to spend. If your customers come from higher earners, that's likely to have had a negative impact. So that's what I would say about the sort of the if you like, rational impact on consumer confidence, the irrational impact, the animal spirits. I think it's fair to say that yesterday's announcement has been reflected in the press in a very difficult way, and I can't see that that's going to increase consumer confidence either. Just to say finally, Tony, before you bring in another question, one of the points that we've consistently made to the government and will continue to do so is the importance of tone and the importance of telling a story about the future.
Yeah, not entirely unrelated to that point, actually. There's a question here. I think it's very important that consumers understand that the only choice we have is to pass this cost back onto them through price. Having done our own calcs last night, I assume that since this is anonymous, I can share them. We estimate that the payroll costs will rise approximately 9%, which equates to 2.6% margin. Raising costs by that much to stand still is something that the industry needs to get into the mind's eye of the consumer so that they understand. Can we do something on our comms to ensure this message gets through, please?
It's a really thoughtful point. It's
Yeah.
a really thoughtful point. If this group don't mind me thinking out loud, I think we have to balance making sure the consumer understands the circumstances that their local pub or restaurant is facing on the one hand, but also we want to make sure that we are not telling consumers, in effect, don't go out for dinner, it's too expensive. And I think there's a balance there to be struck. But certainly I think with government stakeholders who've got to push very hard on this point.
Yeah. Yeah, just the one just in, sorry, just because it is about price increases. Do you plan a joined up approach to further articulate the impact on pubs and restaurants? Are you taking all profits in one go? Likely adjustments in trading. I think this is largely what you're talking about, isn't it? 10% reduction in staffing, question mark, percentages of rates to other industries, which of course will be covered in the consultation. Also likely price increases, i.e. 40 to 50 pence a pint, which sends chills through me, but I think you probably addressed most of that.
Just on that, I think we will be undertaking a fairly comprehensive exercise to collect information and look at the impacts on the sector to take into our conversations with government, because obviously this is an ongoing process. The budget is a set piece, but we're in dialogue all year round, and we need to make sure that we get those impacts into government so they understand what the outcomes are and where we can get solutions into the future.
Yeah. With, I assume, the Employment Rights Bill in mind, one attendee asks, what is the relationship like between UK hospitality and the unions? Which is an interesting one. Alan, do you want to?
Yeah. It's a really interesting question, and I think I would answer that in three parts. One is to say that at a working level, practical technical level, we actually have a really good relationship, and David and our colleague Jim in particular spend a lot of time thinking about issues which are also relevant to unions. So we work together, of course, quite technically and practically all the time. On the employee rights bill work, I and Kate and other colleagues have been in many meetings with Johnny Reynolds, Angela Rayner and the unions. Some of those conversations have, of course, been quite challenging because there are differences of opinion, not in what we're trying to achieve, which is good quality work, which is sustainable and affordable, but in how we address some of the balances and the difficulties with that. So some of those conversations have been challenging, and they should be. It's important that we challenge the unions, and it's important the unions challenge us. And then the level above that is the human level. I'm a member of Unite, and I would say that we have a respectful collegiate relationship with the unions, as I know our members do. But it's important that we work with the unions to both drive towards the same outcome, which is well-paid, good quality, but economically sustainable jobs. whilst making sure that we both understand the challenges which each other's stakeholders face. But we deal with unions every single day.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, we've got a little bit more time for a couple more. This one, hospitality is enormously disproportionately affected by the national insurance contributions changes, high number of employees and low margins. Would UKH be doing anything to help us? Looking at BP, with 22,000 UK employees, it might cost them, say, 20 to 30 million. We have 9,000 employees and could cost us 10 million. They make £3 billion profit a year, and we don't. Well, I feel the pain there. David.
Yeah, the reduction in the threshold and the increase in the tax rate on employer NICs was hugely disproportionately hit hospitality. If you'll have seen our asks into government ahead of the election, we actually asked for exactly the opposite, for the thresholds to go up and the rates to go down. We thought that was absolutely the best way to support businesses to pay higher wages, which was a common goal. I sort of similar to my last answer, we'll be collecting as much evidence as we can and go back into government. We're sort of now reflecting on the outcome and looking at developing policy proposals that help to ameliorate some of the pain that is going to be put on hospitality. So I won't speculate on what those policies could be, but we're certainly looking at them. And again, if anyone who's got policy ideas on this, it'd be really helpful to hear from them. But yeah, we know that this is an acute area of pain and will put a huge cost on hospitality, and we need to look at how to improve that.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably straight back to you, actually, David, on this one, asking for clarity on business rates relief. Our rates are approximately £260,000. So will we receive relief again of approximately 100,000 from April next year? I guess it's how that bill is constructed.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Our rates are approximately £260,000, but it doesn't say how many, whether that's one site or more. So will we receive relief again of approximately £100,000 from April next year?
It'll be a 40% discount on 260, so yeah, 104,000.
Yeah, around that. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah, so the 40% relief will apply from April 2025 to March 2026.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that given that many of the questions were sort of on similar points on national insurance contributions, I think we're covered most of these topics here. I'm just thinking.
There's an interesting question from Richard Moulds here, Tony, about public infrastructure investment.
What's that?
Which I just think.
Oh, yes, just coming. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, just it's worth commenting on. And of course, look, we're not infrastructure economists, and the balance of effects and so on are not for us to describe. It's worth saying that there are three things a government can do to have more investment. You can cut services, you can raise taxes, or you can borrow. The government yesterday did the raising taxes and borrowing. What the markets will be looking to see in the long run is whether or not the money is effectively channeled towards borrowing. One of the things which Rachel Reeves did yesterday was change the calculation of government debt, using the amusing acronym PSNUFFLE, which is basically about changing the way that you would calculate investment for future investment in infrastructure, so that you net off the benefits against the costs, whereas previously the government has simply measured the costs. So the cost of building a bridge might be I don't know, half a billion pounds. But if the bridge is going to generate you economic growth over a given period of £1 billion, well, actually the bridge has made you £500 million. What the market to Richard's point will be asking is whether or not that's done effectively. And what could they have done instead? Well, services can't be cut much further, given that almost all of the money now is dealing with our aging society. My observation to the point of a couple of things here is that the balance towards laying the cost on sectors like ours, which are people-heavy cost sectors, and sectors like, say, my old sector, banking, which are not, is probably unwise. But the question for the long run is whether the investment works.
Yeah. Thanks, Alan. Yeah. Another change of tack here, but I think it's probably a yes or no. With corporation tax, the Chancellor said the rate will remain at 25%. However, it is not clear on the profit brackets. Do we know if this remains at £50,000 lower limit?
I'm not aware of any changes to this, Alan. I'm not sure whether you are, but let's take that away to check.
I haven't seen anything, but the budgets are complicated, so we should.
Yeah. I have a feeling I heard it remained the same, but okay. Okay. Which brings us roundly to the end towards the end of the hour. Just gonna see if there's any more coming in. Otherwise, I shall pay my gratitude to colleagues for their input today and wisdom. And of course, thank all the people who have piled into this webinar today. It's been great to see such interest, albeit probably motivated, not necessarily by great reasons, but there you go. So thank you very much. I believe this will, as is the norm, appear on our website. Should there be anything that you want to go back and see again from the slides or questions. I should know this, shouldn't I? I've been really unprofessional. What have we got coming up in terms of webinars? Have we got anything planned that we want to highlight? I think we do.
We've got one on simpler recycling on the 5th of November.
Brilliant.
And we will, as Alan mentioned earlier, we'll be consulting with members either through webinars or roundtables on employment rights bills, consultations, and industrial strategy green paper response.
Indeed. Thank you for stepping in where my memory failed. Okay, in which case, thank you and have a good day, everybody.